I'm a minister of the gospel. All of my life, I've studied human relations and human behavior and in the scriptures, and I've given my life to helping men in Pattaya find a purpose-driven life in this environment in the last chapter of their lives, where there's so many men from around the world that's retiring here and really have no real purpose. They're just existing. They're coming here and they're like, I'm never going back home. And so they're running from things that they don't ever want to see again. And a lot of them are suppressing emotions and pain that they left behind. And they come to Pattaya and smother that pain with pleasure and having a good time. And they sort of get lost. They lose themselves. It's an adult Disney World and they're chasing the lust of their youth. So this is stories that I've heard where men are committing suicide because they fell in love with girls or they run out of money and the girls don't want them anymore and now their heart is broken, and so it's unreal. And it's a delusion in their mind that they can be so goddamn phone. My purpose for waking up today and every day is for God to lead me to the next person who is going to.
I've done 3 suicides. Hello, thank you for joining us. Welcome to the Next Level podcast. If you haven't already watched an episode, me and my guest share our hard-earned wisdom, practical exercises that have helped us, in turn will help you. Today, I'm with Jimmy. I met Jimmy at a gym that I spend a lot of time at. It's called Battle Conquer, and it's located in Pattaya, Soy 5, I think it is. Yes. So big shout out to the owner, Owen, that has recommended this guest. And he has sponsored this podcast, sponsored me, and he's my first sponsor. So thank you. You are very much appreciated, Owen. Much love. So if you're ever in the area of Pattaya, drop by that gym. And if you see a big, tall, white guy that looks like a WWF wrestler, give him a shout, give him a thanks, and let him know that you've watched the Next Level podcast and I've gave him a shout out. So yeah, much, much love. Let's dive into it. Jimmy.
Yes.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. Can you share with the world what you do?
What I do? Well, I'm a minister of the gospel. All of my life, I've studied human relations and human behavior and in the scriptures, and I've given my life to helping men in Pattaya find a purpose-driven life in this environment in the last chapter of their lives, where there's so many men from around the world that's retiring here and really have no real purpose. They're just existing. And so now I've committed my life to reaching out to those men that I believe God leads me to help them rediscover their purpose or their vertical relationship with their higher power.
That's great to hear. You're in the perfect.
Yes.
You're needed, brother.
Yes.
We are needed. We're needed in Pattaya.
For sure.
Strongly,
For
brother.
sure.
Can you share with me how you work with your clients and some of the specific exercises that you help your clients overcome?
Well, first I get out and I meet guys, just having general conversation, and when talking with people, they talk about 2 things, their money or their problems,
Okay.
And so usually when they start talking about their life or their problems or woe is me's, I become filled with things that I need to say to them to help them navigate through whatever it is that they're being distorted by, or confused by. And so we launched Band of Brothers, which is a men's ministry. And in Band of Brothers, there's a curriculum we call the Journey to the Inner Chamber. And the journey to the inner chamber is likened unto when the high priest had to go from his house to the holies of holies. There was a cleansing process all the way from his house, all the way till he got to the temple into the holies of holies. to prepare him to get in intimate, close relations with God. And so this curriculum is designed to help men do exactly that, to peel back that layer of onion that's blocking them from discovering what is the thing that's helping them to continue to move forward in their lives, to have that relationship with their Father.
Great to hear. Can you share with us some of the most challenging areas that you come across with working with your clients in Pattaya? What are some of the major blockages that you have to help them through?
Well, for a lot of men, again, they're coming from their countries. A lot of them are fleeing from bad relationships. Um,
Businesses falling
businesses.
down.
Just
Yes,
they,
I'm one of
they're
them.
they're coming here and they're like, I'm never going back home, and so they're running from things that they don't ever want to see again.
Mm.
And a lot of them are suppressing emotions and pain that they left behind. And they come to Pattaya, and and sort of smother that pain with pleasure, and having a good time, and they sort of get lost. They lose themselves in running from what they don't want to look at anymore.
Escapism.
Yes, and so um, I help them to look at that. And if those that are willing, because I find that there are a lot of guys that has moved here because they want to just have a great time. It's an adult Disney World, and they're chasing the lust of their youth. But then there's a lot of men who move here because it's affordable, and their retirement and their pensions go nowhere. They got to get a second job in their own countries, but they come here and they can live like kings off of $2,000-3,000 a month. But there are men that didn't necessarily come to be a part of what's here. They just like the vibe here. They like how easy it is and how cheap it is. But there is no other really healthier outlet for men to do things together, that's building them up, or giving them a sense of purpose in this environment. And so that's the biggest challenge is getting men to to not chase the lust of their youth and focus on their own personal growth, because you have to move other things out of the way to see yourself. And they're inundated with a lot going on here, and it's hard to pull them away from the things that's giving them pleasure and making them temporarily happy.
Sounds a lot like short-term versus long-term gratification.
Yes. A lot of short-term gratification here, and men that mistaken it for long-term, found out the hard way that um, Thai women fall in love with bot, not men. And when the
Not
bot,
all of them. Not all of them.
well, you find a good one, and from what I hear, is very difficult. But when the bot is gone, they don't really stay with the man to care after him because they love him. Um, and so this is stories that I've heard where men are committing suicide because they fell in love with girls, or they've run out of money and the girls don't want them anymore. And now that their heart is broken. If you ever had your heart broken as a man, it takes months to get over
Months.
it.
Lucky if it was months.
Yeah,
years,
and,
years,
and
brother.
so
Years.
we find men who go through that experience with young Thai women because they fall in love with these women. And I also find that a lot of men are fulfilling their sexual fantasies, if they've been addicted to pornography, and there've been men that's never been a ladies guy, and had problem picking up on women or what have you. They come here and they can get a woman really easy, and they can fulfill their fantasies with them, and they end up falling in love with that. And that's not sustainable, and so, and when it goes away, they now have an addiction for that, and now they have to figure out, how do I get rid of this feeling now? And usually they self-medicate, or do something to help ease that pain that they're feeling, because now the woman that they feel was their soulmate and they fell in love with is no longer in their lives anymore, or even interested in them anymore. So many stories like that I've heard with older guys who, in the 60s and 70s and 80s, who are getting with women in their 20s and 30s and 40s, and literally falling in love with women that are 3 times younger than them. And so it's unreal. and it's a delusion and an illusion in their mind that they can get someone that younger than them to actually fall in love with them.
Well, I don't know if I buy that totally, because I'm sure there's some women out there that do fall in love with, no matter what the age is. But
There is those cases.
there's I'm sure there is. But what is striking me, that the male doesn't have anything else going on in their lives, and that's when everything. If you're focusing on this woman and she controls so much of your happiness, and that's all you've got, drink, smoke, whatever else, partying. When she's gone, you just put all your eggs in that one basket. How I mended my heart and how I started to take the steps in like recreating my character after heartbreak was when I started my food business. Do you know? As soon as I started my business, my focus pivoted, and like I had something else to fall in love with.
Exactly.
Something positive that was feeding my my growth.
Yes.
Instead of depleting it.
Yes, and exactly, and that's the goal here, is to help men define a purpose. You had a purpose now that distracted you from the pain, and you poured yourself into that purpose, and that became your why factor. And so for a lot of men, again, they need to find that purpose. They don't have a purpose anymore. A lot of the men who are here that are retired, their purpose was to raise their kids, to put them through college, to be a good husband, to run their business, or to finish their career. And now that they're retired, their kids are out of the way, they don't have a wife anymore, they have no purpose. Now it's like, okay, now what do I do with myself? Right?
Party time.
Yeah, party time. Let's go find some young, beautiful girl and then pay her to be my woman, and then they fall into this illusion of a relationship, and oftentimes it's not sustainable emotionally, unless you have enough money, to continue to buy that emotion from her. You see?
Have you do you know what ikigai?
Ikigai.
It's I'm pretty sure it's a Japanese like word, and in a nutshell, it's purpose.
Yes.
What is your purpose for waking up today?
My purpose for waking up today and every day is for God to lead me to the next person He wants me to pour into. Because every day for me is different, because I'm on a mission for that reason, and that reason alone is to connect with men. So every day I'm like, okay, Lord, who is it today? What is my divine appointment today? So my God sets my appointments every day.
That's music to my ears.
And every day is unpredictable, because I'm here just to reach out to men, and every day is different. And so, yeah.
You're shining like you're a superhero, Jimmy, to me. It's like words that a superhero would say. You're devoting your life, your time to help others, and to me, there's nothing else more rewarding.
Nothing else makes any sense to me anymore. I mean, I'm 55 years old. I'll be 56. I have my own history, of addictions and pornography addiction, sex addiction, drug addictions.
Don't tell them everything.
I've been through a lot. Okay?
We'll dive into Do you know what I mean? As we're talking about it, now let's go back into your childhood and share with the world the younger version of Jimmy.
Very interesting. In this story too, it sort of makes me seem like a chosen one, right? Because when I was born, I was in the hospital in an incubator for a whole week. And they weren't sure if I was going to make it through it, but I did. And ever since then, it was just interesting. I've never had the chicken pox, the measles. I've never had a broken bone. I didn't get my first cavity until I was in my mid 30s. It's like I was a very healthy person after that.
So to cut you, just out of interest, how many weeks was your mother in her pregnancy when she gave birth to you?
I can't call the numbers. Sure. Okay. It's not on my mind. Yeah.
Times that's something to do with.
Yeah, I believe that she did go to full term.
Okay.
Yes, but whatever. She told me that I was under heavy fever, and the doctors couldn't figure out why I had a fever. And so they had to keep me in the hospital because they couldn't get my temperature down as an infant, and so, yeah, I take that when I hear that story as if, I was under attack by the enemy because he knew I was coming into the world to change things. That's the way I see it. Because that's been my story, basically, But as a child, I didn't like school. I'm an 8th grade dropout after being kept back 4 times. I dropped out of school at 16 years old. When my graduating class graduated, I quit, and I went to work, and I've been a workaholic ever since. And so at 16, I couldn't read or write.
I just want to say, many of my guests say the same thing, So to me, like falling out of school, falling out of college, a lot of the times is a positive.
Yes.
So you just said that. I don't go, oh, it's not a surprise.
No.
It's not a surprise to me.
Yeah. Lots of very successful people dropped out of school, particularly in our era too, in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Those that went to public school systems, right? They were being undereducated. And so those people who were really certifiably geniuses, they didn't know how to teach them. And so they became bored in school because they weren't challenging their brains, and they became problem kids or class clowns, or they cut class, right? Because they were bored, right?
Yeah. The creativity is not sparking.
No.
It's just, right, do this. I'm going through a book. I'm halfway through now. Seth Godin, Lynch Pin.
Mm-hmm.
That's all I'm saying.
Yes. To give you an example of what I mean is my sister, who was an honor roll student all through school. I mean, elementary school, junior high school, she was always on the honor roll, A, B. She's never really had a C. She's always an A-B student, And then when she graduated high school, she couldn't pass a college entry exam. Goes to show you how they were undereducating us in public school systems, that she wanted to go to school and be a doctor, but she had to settle for medical administration because she wasn't smart enough to pass a college entry exam and actually go to college. But she was an honor roll student all of her life.
So correct me if I'm mistaken.
All of her childhood.
Are you getting at the fact that they're stunting your creativity?
Well, yes, and if you're in the inner cities and you're going to public school systems, the funding to get the books and the curriculums and the things for higher education is not there. Versus if you go to a private school where you're actually paying to go to school, the curriculum is usually is much better. And they're not teaching you how to go into servitude. They're teaching you how to be leaders, how to be managers, how to start businesses in private schools, where in public schools they're teaching you how to go get a job.
Get in line.
Yes, exactly. And that's how they're educating them. And so
I'm with you. Okay, continue that process of your upbringing.
So yes, again, dropping out of school, I was done. My sister passed me up. I know I was done then, She left me in junior high and went to high school. And I got a job. My first job was Popeye's Chicken, frying chicken for Popeye's Chicken, at 16 years old. And my mom thought I was still going to school, but I was going to work. And when I got my first check, I went and I presented it to her. She's like, "What's this?" So I was like, "That's my check." She's like, "You're not going to school?" I was like, "Nope." She's like, "Okay, if you go to jail, go to jail. Don't call me,
Really?
And she's like, "It's your choice." And so I've been working ever since, never sold drugs in my life, never been to prison in my life. It's just been a workaholic all my life. But at 17 years old is when God captured my heart, and I grew up in church because my grandma, back in those days, you had to go to church, and especially in America being a Christian country. So I grew up in church as a child and had that foundation. At when we became teenagers, we weren't made to go to church anymore. We were always saying, you should be going. And I had a girlfriend that I thought I was in love with, and she wanted to get married and have a baby. And, I'm 17, she's 16, and I'm like, which parent are we going to go live with, But I thought I was in love,
I remember the same thing, bro.
And I thought I was in love, and I was really considering just getting her pregnant,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
starting this family, And I remember it was a Tuesday. I'll never forget it because that following Sunday I went to church and I prayed to God. I said, Lord, teach me how to be a husband and a father to a family because my dad was never in my life. He was a pimp, hustler, drug dealer, drug user. He didn't want to be a dad.
Mm,
And I was raised by my four aunts, my grandma, and my mother. So I was pretty much raised by women,
mm,
you know, which was good because my mother's side of the family was squares. No one smoked, no one drank. I think I had one auntie that smoked Benson and Hedges,
okay.
but that's all I was exposed to on my mom's side of the family. It was more of a wholesome side. My dad's side of the family, on the other hand, was the total opposite.
Did you see them much? Your father's side?
I spent every summer with my
Oh,
father
did you?
actually because I was a manly man kid. I wanted to spend time with my dad. Where's my
Okay.
dad? Tell my dad to come get me. I want to go see my dad. I was
Oh.
that kid that I wanted to spend time.
So he was there.
No, he wasn't. But I had to call for him. And I was telling my
Ah.
mom, call my dad, tell him to come get me. And so my mom would call my dad and she'll put me on the phone, you know. And I'd be like, hey, Dad, what are you doing? He's like, oh, so I said, Dad, come get me. I want to see you. Come get me. You promise? You promise? I used to have to make him
Mm.
come and spend
Oh,
time with me,
okay.
you know. And so during the school breaks, he would come and get me because I would tell him, come get me, Dad. And he would take me to his house, which was out in the country because I lived in New Orleans,
Mm.
Louisiana. By the way, that's where I'm from. And he lived in Slidell, Louisiana, which was on the outside of New Orleans, which is more of a rural country area.
Mm.
And I would spend summers with him, 3-month summers. But any and everything that he wanted to do, he did as if I wasn't there.
Okay.
Like he was a drug dealer, as I
Yeah.
said, and so he would do his drug deals. He would take me to his whores houses. He would
Mm.
take me to the bar, like wherever he went. He just took me with him, because he wasn't a dad,
Mm.
and so I was exposed to that side of the fence as well because my dad's from Mississippi. He too himself was dropped out of school in the third grade to work the cotton fields of Mississippi because my great grandparents were sharecroppers in America, after coming out of slavery, and so they worked their land and what have you. And my grandmother, my father's mother, she had 12 kids. Out of the 12, she only had 2 girls, so she
Mm.
had 10 boys. All of these boys she had, I think 2 preachers came out of that, but the rest were pimps and hustlers, growing up in the 50s and 60s,
Mm.
and so my dad being one of those, he was a drug dealer. He trained race horses because he was a country boy, so he knew how to work with race horses, and he had a landscaping business. That's how he made his money.
I'm with you. Can you share with us some of your biggest challenges while growing up until now, up until you got the job at Popeyes? Can you share with us any traumatic moments that you feel like in your adult life that held you back?
Yeah, my lack of practical education,
Oh, okay.
has always been my challenge. Like I said, at one time I couldn't read, so I'm a self-educated man, and I became self-educated really basically when I started studying scripture. But because I couldn't read, I used to listen to my Bible tapes with my
Mm.
Walkman. If
I'm
you
with you.
remember Walkmans, I don't know if you're old enough to remember
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm
Walkman.
just about.
Yeah, but I had my Walkman and my Bible tapes, and I would just play scripture,
Ah.
scripture, scripture. So the very first book that's ever gone into my subconscious mind is the Bible. And so that is the foundation of my education is scripture. And then I went from, just listening to scripture to looking up words in Greek and looking up words in Hebrew and doing church history. And so I began to self-educate just in researching the Bible. And then the various jobs that I had, whenever I applied for a job, I always said I graduated from high school. And if they hired me, I had to be a quick learner. And so that was one of the skills that I picked up very quickly is to learn what they showed me right away because I couldn't let them know that I didn't know.
Mm.
And so I played the part And then they gave me the job, and then I exceeded at the job more than anyone else because I could not disclose that I was an uneducated person, you see.
Over delivering.
Yes. But, when I got into five-star dining, where I literally worked in a full tuxedo, I was always the back waiter, which is basically a busboy.
Okay.
There's the front waiter, or there's the captain, the front waiter, and the back waiter, right? Well, the captain is the lead that goes to the table and he presents the wine and he presents the menu and what have you. And then, the front waiter, he assists him in doing those things, and he has to have some knowledge of that too. In case they ask him questions at the table, he needs to be able to answer. But the back waiter just goes and cleans the tables, He's still in a tuxedo, but he's basically just a busboy. So I was never able to exceed to the higher positions that required me to study things like wine and become a wine connoisseur or recipes, because I'm not much of a cook anyway, but I was always challenged with reading things to retain information. I've never been a page turner ever. I've never finished a book just reading through a book.
Never ever still now?
Never ever in my life.
Okay.
For me, I was always a purpose reader. If I'm going into a book, I'm going in to get what's in it that I need from it. Once I got what I want, I'm done with the book.
Okay.
So I'm not a novel reader or anything like that. I basically research stuff because I was into personal development and human relations and human behavior. That I got fascinated with when I went to private security school, to be a private security guy. And they had a course called Human Relations and Human Behavior.
Okay.
Well, I was fascinated about that, because I was like, how do we work? I wanted to know everything about humanity. I'm studying the Bible, now I'm studying this. And so those were the two things that drove my purpose in life, for self-educating myself. To get information. And so as I was gathering information and really being passionate about learning those things is how I started self-educating.
What was the process and the steps leading up to you starting that course?
The private security, I just wanted a job,
really?
and security jobs were available, and anyone can get a security job, and I was trying to go into private security, which pays a little more, for a bodyguard or our personal driver, or stuff like that. And I was trying to get more into that arena of security, and that's why I took that course.
Okay, how old was you then?
I was 19.
Okay.
18, 19, I was very young. I just started. I gave my life to Christ at 17, and now I'm listening to stuff, and then I was like, okay, what do I do in my life? And then I was like, okay, well, I can be a security guy. And then I went to private security school. So it was about 18, 19, right after I gave my life.
How long was that for?
The course, I think it was a 9-month course to finish it.
Yeah.
I had to pay for that class. It's just a vocational class, that I had to pay for.
Okay, so let's dive into, because you mentioned your addictions. Okay, what part of your life did they start being part of your life?
Well, I would say at 15 is when I smoked my first joint.
Okay.
Again, back in the 80s, I grew up in the 80s, in 83, 84, I was 15, 16 years old, so my first joint, was the gateway, obviously,
Yes.
and we used to be, my boys, my friends, we used to be those guys on the corner, drinking cheap wine and singing to the Temptations, and just beat bopping or whatever on the corner, late at night and just getting high. I was never a drinker, though. I was a weakling when it came to alcohol. But we were drinking cheap wine, Thunderbird, Mad Dog 2020, Wild Irish Rose, Boom Farm, all of that cheap wine that gets you drunk really fast, and I would really get sick as a dog. I couldn't drink. I was weakling when it came to drinking. So thank God, because I probably would have had to get over alcoholism too, if I really was a strong drinker. But
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But then after that, I was first introduced to crack cocaine when a buddy of mine broke up some crack and he laced it over a joint, which they call primo, right?
Crack or coke?
Crack.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
crack.
Mm.
Um, First time I snorted coke was with my brother, and I was about 15 years old too. But I didn't. That didn't make any sense to me. Putting this stuff in my nose and it draining down my throat, and I didn't like it.
Oh, okay.
It's just it turned me off. But smoking has always been my biggest addiction. Cigarettes, marijuana, and and then taking the crack and breaking it up in powder and putting it over marijuana and rolling that up is how I was introduced to crack.
Okay.
You know,
Go for it. How was your relationship with that?
I never really became addicted to it. It was more of a social party kind of thing. If I wasn't with other people, I never really went after it or chased it. It was always in a party setting. Where
recreational.
Yes, I would just participate. And then it did get to a point later on. I was hanging out with this girl who liked to smoke a lot, and then I was smoking a lot more on a pipe now. Just hanging out with her, and I got a sense of what it was to yearn for the high, and I remember the first time I got up in the middle of the night at like 3 in the morning, and I wanted to get high. And I left the house and went to the nearby guy on the corner, and I stole some crack, and I went to, a trap house, where people are in there getting high and smoke my crack, and I got back to the house, and when I went to the bathroom, because it makes you want to use the bathroom, right?
Okay.
I had this vision of myself being this strung out crackhead on the street, begging for money. It's just like this flash came across me, and I was like, hell no, excuse me. I was like, no, that's not going to be me. And I fell on my knees right there in the bathroom and begged God to take that from me. And if he did, I would never do it again. And I would say about 2 weeks after that, the desire for it just went away. And I never did it ever since then.
Well done, man.
Yeah, well, glory be to God, because I asked for it, and I saw myself slipping into wanting because I left my house by myself.
Falling in love.
No one else was with me. I went and looked for it at 3 o'clock in the morning and went to the corner and scored and went to a trap house where I didn't know anyone else. It's just a bunch of drug dealers, and I'm in there smoking with them, and when I went back home, I realized what I was doing. I was like, what are you doing right now? You really about to go down this road, And I was like, no. And I just put it into it, and I prayed about it and gave it to God. And about 2 weeks later, it just went away.
Nice. Did you mention sex addiction as well?
Sex addiction also started very early. Back in the day, Penthouse and Playboy was the biggest things, as far as magazines, and Playboy was the first to come out with, video.
Okay.
On cable, Cox Cable or what have you. Playboy would put out, pornography movies. And so that was my first exposure. And then a friend of mine, I was a teenager again, about 17 years old, dropped out of school. And I always hung out with older guys because I've always been a tall guy. I'm 6'8", and so I've always looked older than what I am.
Okay.
And so I hung out with guys in the neighborhood who are much older than me. And another friend of mine introduced us to a pornography tape, VHS tape.
Okay.
And put this tape in, and then it was just raw, and then I was just like, watch porn like it's a soap opera, one after another. And I was 17 years old when I first was exposed to that. And then throughout, my adulthood, I would look at porn, on my own, especially when it was readily available on the internet for free. You could just look at it, And then I that addiction as well, I don't even remember when that began. When I decided to stop doing it, it just happened. I think it just became redundant, and it wasn't fulfilling anymore. It was just it just wasn't doing it anymore. I guess, because I never really intentionally had to fight from it. It just sort of
Slipped
just
through.
went away.
Yeah.
I was no longer,
Okay.
I was just no longer interested in watching
Ah.
porn anymore.
Yeah. Sounds like your consciousness and your awareness has just left, just just risen.
Yeah, it just wasn't serving its purpose the way it used to. Because like I say, it was redundant. Like you've seen it, right? I mean, I've seen I don't know how many episodes of different porn, and it's just
Yeah, it's reminding me of when you grow up, like you're in love with cartoons, and then at a certain age, you get talking to like women, and you get like attracted to women, and it's women, and then you might move to substance, So it's stages and stages of life, eh?
Yes. And when it came to women, I never really had a problem with women, even though I felt a little insecure in myself. I didn't think I was a good looking guy. I didn't think I was the pretty boy kind, you know what I mean? Because I hung out with a friend of mine who was the pretty boy kind, and we would go clubbing and stuff together, and girls would ask him for his phone numbers. Girls would send him drinks, and I had to work for it. And I'm so I was like, I must not be good looking. So I had this, this
self-esteem
insecurity.
damaged.
Exactly, but he used to tell me, man, this girl's checking you out, man. And I was like, no, so I didn't really believe in myself in picking up on girls, even though I didn't really have a problem with it.
How have you grown and faced that like self-doubt?
Oh yeah, totally.
What sort of epiphany moments have you had, like an epiphany moment, or have like you gained some knowledge that has you've just been able to it's not
Well, at this stage in my life, I'm celibate and I'm comfortable in my celibacy.
Wow.
Because I've been through relationships, I've been through girls. I've done it. I've been in orgies. I've been to swinger clubs. I've had friends with benefits. And three or four of them at one time, and they all know that I'm seeing them. Like I've done it. And it's all vanity. It just don't mean anything to me anymore. I've really sown my royal oats, and I've done all that could be done, and it's
wow.
now I've gotten to the other side of it all, and I look back and I go, what the hell was I doing? So it doesn't make any sense to me anymore. So I'm desensitized to a lot of things because to me it's foolish now. I see it as foolishness, very stupid to put myself. I have had myself in those positions, but I'm also grateful for the experiences.
Yes.
Because I can speak to them.
Celibate in Pattaya.
Yes.
Thailand.
Very
Incredible.
interesting. Very interesting.
Very rare, sir. Very rare.
Yeah.
How long have you been celibate?
For 6 months now.
6 months.
So I just went through a divorce last February of last year. My divorce was final.
Thai lady or?
No, she's Mexican, from Mexico.
Okay.
Actually. And I really, really did not want to divorce my wife. I was really fighting for my marriage, but it was a very toxic, very, very toxic relationship. She was a narcissist. There's a lot of history with her. Her mom was a witch, practicing witch.
Oh, really?
Wow. And her sisters are practicing witch today, so she has a background of witchcraft in her family, but she's the complete opposite, but it's like generational curses been chasing her. Something doesn't want her life to be happy. I think that her mother and even her sister, who hates her, is praying against her life, on the dark side of things, because there are things that happen with her. It just makes no sense. It just doesn't add up. And I've encountered demon exposure with her, me being a minister and a man of God, and when I married her is when I decided to come out of my backslidden state back to the faith, because I was backslidden away from my faith for 20 years.
Okay.
For 20 years, I was like, Lord, I can't do this. I'm not doing this. You say be hot or cold. At least I can be obedient to one. And I went cold into the world. And and really just was having a great time. I was that prodigal son, just doing whatever I want to do,
Okay. Ah.
and but still loving on people. And it was interesting that even when I was in that state, because I wouldn't minister to people or share anything about what I knew, because I've been studying, as I told you, since I was very young.
Mm.
So I had a lot of biblical knowledge in me, a lot of psychology knowledge about human behavior and stuff. And so when I was out in the world, I would not counsel or minister to anyone unless they asked me a question.
Ah.
If they asked me a question, I was charged to give the answer.
What did your life look like? What throughout that period?
Which period?
Throughout that 20 years of you said you was out there in the world.
Well,
What was you?
let me back up a bit. And so, um, being in New Orleans, I left New Orleans. I was there for 30 years. I became a truck driver, and I traveled all over America driving trucks. And I got married to my first wife, and then that didn't work out, and we moved to Texas. And I left her in Texas, and I moved to California.
Okay.
After my first marriage is where I became angry with God, angry with life.
Bitter.
I became bitter, frustrated, confused about a lot of things. This is my younger 30s now.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, God, things are not making sense, and I don't understand why my life is falling apart. And so many things were happening to me during that time that I didn't have answers to, and I was praying about, but I wasn't getting answered prayers. And I became angry with God. I became angry with life, and
Mm.
and so I just walked away from the church. I walked away from it all because I didn't get any answers.
So
Um,
can you dive into that breakup and the marriage? Can you just share with us
the
how it
first one
was?
or the second
The
one?
first one.
Mm-hmm.
Can you dive into like falling in love, being in love, the
The
toxicity?
the first one. Um, my first wife married her high school sweetheart out of high school. They were in love in high school. They got married out of high school. When they graduated, she had two girls for him, and then he died and had a heart attack at 32 years old unexpectedly. Okay. And so when I met her, I was 28 when I met her. She was 36. She was older than me. And during this time, I was searching for churches, and I really was trying to do the celibate thing then,
Mm.
but I was in my 20s and still young and still wanted to have a woman. And so I decided, like, Lord, if I'm going to do ministry, I have to have a wife. I need a wife. And so I was sort of on this hunt for a wife. And when I met her, I was in a club one night, and we were talking, and she just was. This was her first time coming out of her house in months because her mother had died of lung cancer. Her father-in-law, which is her husband's father, died of gangrene, and her husband died of a heart attack all in the same year. Right.
Mm.
And so she lost three people that were extremely close to her. And so she was just coming out of this severe depression. And this was her coming out night, at this club, first time actually getting out and trying to start her life again. Well, she met me.
Mm.
Right. And when she started telling me about what was going on with her, well, the counselor in me, started counseling with her, and we became friends. And I would go visit her at the house, and I'm looking for a wife. Well, she's got two kids. She's already domesticated. Her husband just died, and I was like, she's a good girl. She goes to church. It's like, you know what? Maybe this is the one for me.
Mm.
And I really liked her. She was a very good looking woman. She was tall. She was about 6'1". I'm 6'8". You know, beautiful woman. Um, and we got married. The problem with that marriage was that I was living in the shadow of a ghost, because she wanted me to be like her husband. She was still in love with the man she had, her
Lost.
husband.
Yeah.
He just was taken from her, but her heart was still his, and I couldn't replace him, and so was in that marriage for 4.5 years, almost 5 years, and we just fell apart because emotionally it wasn't sustainable because I was not him, and there were things that he did that moved her, and I was a very different person, and so we never really fell in love with each other.
Oh.
Our relation started out as very good friends.
Yeah.
In me counseling with her and helping her, and so our friendship was, and we're still friends to this day, but I did raise her daughter. She had a teenage daughter when I met her, and she had a 9-year-old, and I raised the 9-year-old. Today she still calls me dad. I put her through college, and I was the father figure in her life, because our dad was taken from her.
Nice. Lovely.
And so we're still friends to this day because I still loved her kids. I tried to love
your family.
Yeah, I tried to love her, but it just didn't work. But I still love the kids.
There.
Yeah, And so that's what happened to the first marriage. It's just it wasn't going to work out.
Yeah.
We were drifting into an arranged marriage.
Totally understand.
Just because we were married, but we weren't here.
Can you next go into that time of healing your heart from the first marriage?
My heart wasn't really broken.
Ah.
I came to the knowledge that if I stayed in this, I'm going to wind up having an affair because I'm not attracted to her and she's not attracted to me. And I was a truck driver then, and I was delivering mail for the postal service, and there was this girl at the post office that I was attracted to, and she even took a truck ride with me. And so I saw myself already, and I didn't want to fall in love with someone still in that marriage. And so I was like, I need to just end this because
great honesty.
It's just not going to work, and it's going to turn out bad if I don't put an end to this, because my heart is already wanting someone else, and I didn't want to fall in love with someone else while still married to her.
Totally understand, brother.
And so that's sort of how it works.
Okay, and then go into the next marriage.
Yes, and
or would you like to share how it went with the lady in the post office?
It didn't.
No. Okay.
Because I didn't pursue it wholeheartedly because I was married.
Okay.
You see, and I'm still in my heart, I'm a man of God, So I had some morals and principles. Wow. I wasn't just walling out, but I was extremely attracted to her, and I just saw myself just like, dude, you're gonna do it.
I'm gonna say, even though it's a little bit racist, there's not many black men I've met that would do that.
Well, again,
you're very, very rare, my friend.
That's why I say, like my upbringing and my programming, my conditioning, my heart conditioning has always been the Word of God. So God had most of my heart, even though I'm still human. The morality in me outweighed, just following, my fleshly desires. I did more sinning, doing things that wasn't loving toward myself than I would do in hurting other people. You see?
Yeah.
Like doing drugs and smoking. See, I'm hurting myself, but it's not
self-sabotage.
Yeah, but when it came to other people, I had a lot of respect for people's feelings and and concerns and stuff. So
I'm with you. Okay, go into the next marriage.
And the next marriage is also very interesting. I mentioned to you that I was angry with life. I'm in my backslidden state, and I'm in California now. I moved to California, and I had gotten involved into theater, and this is one of the things that God had used to prepare me for my mission today, because I walked away from my mission because I felt insecure, and the things that I had to go and teach concerning false doctrine, because I do contend for the truth of the gospel of Christ. And there's a lot of false teaching out there. And I've been called to address that because all I have in my head is biblical knowledge. And so I could see things. I'm like Morpheus that can look into the matrix and I can see what's going on. That's how I am with scripture and doctrines and stuff. Like, because of all I know is scripture, things that is not scripture, I could see it. It just sticks out to me, and so I've been called to address these issues, but I was insecure in who I was, and how I presented myself, and even how I talked back then. I even still spoke heavy Ebonics, coming from Louisiana in the South. It was a strong accent there. But I had to go up against men with master's degrees in theology, and pastors and stuff. And I'm called to address this. Well, I just felt insecure, and I was like, you know what, Lord, this is too much for me. I can't do this. You got the wrong guy.
Mm.
And I walked away from it, you know. But in that time, um, I was truck driving. Me and my first wife got divorced, and I was like, okay, Lord, you know, I started doing trucking ministry where I was actually ministering on the CB, passing trucks as we were passing each other, or sitting in a truck stop, and I'm talking on the CB to see who's going to bite, you know, back and forth conversations, that kind of stuff. Most truck stops, huge truck stops, had chapels at the truck stop that I would go and teach at, you know, because it's just natural in me. It just comes from me,
Interesting, man.
you know. And so I got tired of running the road, you know, and driving trucks, you know, and I was like, where am I going to live in the country? I've been all over America, you know, all 56. Well, no, I don't. I haven't been to Alaska yet, but, um, and I was trying to decide where am I going to go. Well, I was seeing this girl in Buffalo, New York, but it's too cold in Buffalo. I was like, no, I'm not moving to Buffalo, you know. And then I got a load. Oh, I have to tell this part because it's very significant. Um, so we were waiting on a load, me and my buddy, my partner who drove with me, and my eyes woke up, like literally eyes just opened up, and um, Romans chapter 2 was running through my head, you know. Romans chapter 2, Romans chapter 2. And I was like, Romans chapter 2, and I'm sleepy. So I get up, I grab my Bible, you know, and I open it up to Romans chapter 2, and I just started reading it. And man, the spirit just started rebuking me, like, who art thou that judges another and doest the same? You think that you shall escape the judgment of God, you know, and blah blah blah. Oh, it just started, and I just started bawling. I'm just crying. And my partner woke up. He's like, what's wrong, what's wrong? And I'm like,
Oh,
man, I'm just bawling, you know, because it just convicted my spirit, you know. And so we went and truck stop, had breakfast, come back, and there's a load waiting for us. So we had to go from Baltimore to, I forget where it was, somewhere in Pennsylvania, and to go pick up this load. And usually we could put up to five. I was a master mover at that time, and we did military and corporate moves. And you could put up to 5 households in a 53-foot trailer. Well, this particular load, this guy took up the entire trailer with his house. One load going from the East Coast all the way to the West Coast of California, right? And so we bring this guy there, and he's supposed to have cash on delivery. He didn't have the money, you know, which was over $30,000 cash he was supposed to have, and he didn't have it. He couldn't transfer that much, you know, in a day. So it made us have to stay in that area for a weekend,
mm.
you know. And I had never really been on the Pacific coast, you know, of California, you know. And we stayed there, and just this sense of peace just fell over me because I was angry, bitter, you know, and went through a divorce. Well, actually, we hadn't got divorced yet, but separated from my wife. You know, I'm bitter, I'm angry, I'm just running the road. And I get to this place, and just this peace just falls over me. And I tell my buddy, I said, man, you feel that? He's like, what? I said, man, this place feels like home, you know? And I really like the area. And make a long story short, I ended up moving to that area, you know, and it's what they call California's wine country. You
Okay.
know, there's like over 300 wineries in this particular region, you know, because it's like spring and fall year round. It doesn't get too hot, doesn't get too cold. A lot of fog moves in, you know, so there's a lot of wine vineyards that are
Mm.
there. Very expensive area of California. It's a retirement community. A lot of people move out of LA and San Francisco. They retire in that unit, in that area. And so I ended up there and got a job selling cars, ended up being a bouncer. I'm also a painter contractor, and I started my own painting business, you know, and that's what I had been doing for the past 20 years in California is painting
Okay.
houses, house painter. Um, but in that time, I was painting this lady's house, and she overheard me singing to a Sam Cooke CD, right? And she says, "My Lord, you could sing." She says, "You ever thought about doing theater?" And I was like, no, you know, no, I've never thought about doing theater. She's like, well, I wanted you to come see this Ray Charles Legend show that I'm doing. And so she gave me tickets to a Ray Charles Legend show. And I went and saw the show, and it was a great show. They did such a great job with the show. She said, "Did you like that?" I said, "That was pretty awesome." And she's like, "You think you can do that?" And I was like, "I don't know. I've never done anything like that before." And she's like, "Well, I want to cast you in the Nat King Cole Legend show." And she's like, "You think you'd be interested?" And Spirit in me says, "Do it."
Yeah.
And I was like, "Okay. All
Okay.
right. Sure. Why not? Okay, let's do it." Inside, I'm like, "What the hell are you doing? You don't know nothing about this. You've never acted before, danced and sang before." And so I did, and they cast me in the Nat King Cole Legend show. And I was terrified, you know. But it was a week, we're in Hell Week before opening the show. And, the devil's on this side saying, "You idiot, you're going to make a fool out of yourself. You don't know what you're doing, man. You better back out right now so they can find someone else to take your part. You don't know how to do this." And then the angels on this side was saying, "Jimmy, think about it. Would they be showcasing you if you didn't have something to offer?" And I went, well, they are putting a lot of money into this, and people are buying tickets, and they're moving forward. I guess there's something there. I say, balls to the walls. They're either going to love it or hate it. And I just let go of the fear.
Roll the dice.
Just roll it, and I just let go. I say, you know what? I'm just going to go have fun.
Yeah.
And I
you
let
just had
go.
to sing and act. Yeah.
Well, I had to sing and dance and act. There was choreography. There was a whole, and I was the star of the show. Like I opened the show. It was built around me. And the whole
you
shebang.
Invested a lot of effort and time.
Into this show. And I was like, well, they're not going to make a fool of themselves. Obviously, they spend a lot of money, so there must be something there. I'm just going to just have fun. If I make a mistake, I make a mistake. I don't care. They're just going to get whatever I'm going to bring.
Yes.
And nailed it, man. Standing ovation, man. It was just such a great show. And after that, just the high and the adrenaline from that, and the accomplishment of that, it became my new hobby, my new addiction,
How many did you do?
I've done 14 theater productions in 18 years. I was doing 1 to 2 shows or 2 to 3 shows a year.
And then how many nights would you have to put that show
on? Most shows, depending on the production company, but they would run it for the whole month, so every weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Friday, Saturday matinees, Saturday night, Sunday matinees, Sunday night, so we were running 5 to 6 shows a weekend.
Interesting.
Doing live theater,
Yeah. Can we dive into that next relationship you went through, the marriage?
So that is important to say because of the theater stuff, and God was structuring me, giving me the confidence I need to go and be the guy He needed me to be. In theater, the most important things that I learned was, one, I got over the fear of public speaking. Yes. I performed before thousands of people. I learned just the art of improvisation.
Yeah.
Just trusting the process, and so with the Holy Spirit is like trusting the Holy Spirit is improvisation, and the most important thing that I learned was read the script and be the character, and in theater, I don't care what's going on in your life. If your mother could have died, if you're in the show, leave it at the door. You cannot bring your life into the theater.
Present.
Yes, you forget about who you are and you become your character, and I learned how to do that very well. And so now, going 12 years later, I meet my ex-wife, and I was doing a theater production. We was on lunch break from rehearsal. I go to a Panda Express, which is an Asian food restaurant, and she's there in line, and she was speaking Spanish, and they were trying to understand what she was saying to get her order. So she was taking a long time. So I went around her, and they took my order, and I saw her, and she saw me, and was like love at first sight kind of thing. Like we both were just like looking at each other from our peripheral, and I could see she was checking me out, and I'm like, this girl is really checking me out. Like she's really on her brother right now, And so I'm in line in this restaurant, and you're like, how do you flirt with a girl in line at the Panda Express? It's kind of awkward. There's other people here, and it's like, but you got to say something to her before you leave, because she is totally digging you right now, So I walked past her and I said, hey, everything about you from head to toe is absolutely beautiful. And she's like, oh, thank you. And then I walked out, because there's other people that heard that. It was just kind of weird and awkward,
Yeah. Didn't get the number or anything?
No, I just walked out, and
Okay.
and so. But when I walked out, I had forgotten my sweet and sour sauce and my teriyaki sauce that goes with my food, and I had actually left the parking lot, and I thought, I was like, dang it, I forgot my sauces,
And that woman.
Yeah, so I made the block, and I said, man, I hope that girl is still there, and as soon as I parked my truck and I get out of the truck, she walked out of the restaurant, and she saw me in a work truck because I'm a painter. And so she says to me, she's like, oh, you working? And I said, oh, I forgot my sauces, and that opened up dialogue for us. And then we started talking in the parking lot. But I could barely understand what she was saying because at that time she maybe spoke maybe 20% English, like very broken English,
Yeah.
But all she was saying is, oh, me no nasty woman, me respectable woman, but me lonely, and me need man, and I was like, well, you want to go out tonight? And she's like, oh, I don't know you. I said, it's okay, we can go out. And she's like, oh, okay, I try. And so and so we got together. Make a long story short, 2 years later we got married. And for me, getting married was recommitting myself to my God, and that's how God used her to extract me out of where I was. And with my theater experience, I went right back into ministry, and we got married 8 years ago.
Okay.
But it was very toxic because culturally, language barrier, communication problems, a lot going on with that. There's a lot of stories about that. But we got the divorce. I came to Thailand. When I came to Thailand, I was completely sensory overload. Everything I saw, I never knew anything about Thailand and what went on here. And I was invited by a buddy of mine who owned a radio station here. And when I got here, sensory overload. Like, what is going on around here? Oh my God, this is crazy, And it started, meeting with local churches and discipling and mentoring, and they asked me to come back. I was like, okay, I guess I'm going to have to, And then I came back last summer, did a 3-month mission, and then the guys was like, man, you need to start your own domain here. You really need to, the guys respect you, they're learning, guys from 5 different countries got baptized, like I'm really doing the work, and men are benefiting from it. And so that's how Band of Brothers was born last summer.
Oh, very cool logo, man.
Yeah.
Very cool logo.
So last summer, Band of Brothers was born from me here helping men, and men were actually benefiting from, that. And it's like, man, there's a great need here. We're glad you're here. One guy told me, he's like, man, I was about to leave and move somewhere else. He said, but I'm so glad you came here. You gave me a different sense of purpose, And so that just made it come alive. I realized that, okay, there is a great need of men who are not here, are tired of doing what they're doing and need something different.
Can you give the audience like some examples of how you've helped your clients? I know you mentioned purpose earlier on. That's obviously a massive thing.
Well, I've stopped 3 suicides since I've been here, and again, these were guys that I didn't know. I met a guy at the traffic light on a bike, and I don't have my star on, but I wear a Star David, that represents my inheritance in Christ. Grafted in, contrary in nature, being a seed of Abraham by faith, And so when I wear this is a conversation piece. People ask me about it all the time. I also have it on my ring, And so I'm at the traffic light on my bike, and this guy sees the star on my ring, and he sees the star on me, and he's like, hey, are you Jewish? And I say, oh, through Christ. He said, oh, you go to church? And I was like, yeah. He's like, oh, I was thinking about going. He said, man, I was just praying to God just now, and the Spirit is telling me I need to go to church. Where are you going to church at? And so I invited him to go to church. So he's this Russian guy, young guy, 33 years old. And he was contemplating committing suicide, right? Because he had got with some hookers here in Pattaya, and they got him high on some drugs, and he thought he was losing his mind, and he was going to kill himself. And come to find out, he contracted HIV as well. And so he's like wanting to end his life, and then, just kind of counseled him through that. And he ended up, getting baptized and stuff. And and yeah, stop that. Another guy that was,
So what does he do now?
what does he do?
What's his purpose now?
He's a day trader. He's a young guy.
Okay. Yep.
33 years old. He's not old enough to be retired here, but he's making money online. I believe he's going back to Russia. I'm not sure. I haven't seen him in quite a while.
Wow. Credit to you, man.
But he didn't end his life. And so to me,
man.
I mean, I don't know if it was there for me to truly convert him into truly following the Lord. Even though I led him there. Ultimately, the choice is his to continue his journey. But it's been a while since I've seen him.
What sort of philosophies what are the most valuable philosophies that you know of that have massively impacted your life?
Philosophies. The Bible. It's just been the basic thing for me. Like I said, I've never been a book reader. I've never really read any other philosophies unless I'm doing research on church history. There was a book called Church in History that I was very fascinated by. I took a class once to deal with my anger called Living Love.
Yeah.
And Living Love dealt with psychological and emotional addictions. And it's more of a Buddhist approach.
Yeah.
To interpersonal growth and discovery, and so, but those are the two things that I really dived into.
Yeah, but what specifically, what statements or quotes or ways of living? Pardon?
1 hour or 2?
5 minutes, we finish. Yeah. Okay. What specific philosophy or quote has been massive, that you hold on to?
I don't know if there's specific ones,
Okay.
because again, the foundation of mine is biblical knowledge in my subconscious mind.
Yeah.
And so that's what drives me, is my faith. The just shall live by faith and not by sight. I live that out every day, So that's the philosophy for me is I trust the Holy Spirit to bring to my memory the vast amount of scriptures that's in my subconscious mind in the times that I need them.
Yes.
It's based upon what I'm experiencing. When I need an answer and I say, Lord, what should I do? A scripture pops up, and that's how I cope.
How can people reach out to you and connect with you?
Well, they can find me on Facebook, Messenger as under Jimmy Thornton. They could find me on my website, and let me get that information for you. I should have had that queued up. With Band of Brothers.
And they also can find you at Battle Conquer.
Battle Conquer, we get there at 7:30 every morning to work out.
7:30 every single morning.
It's supposed to be 7, but usually it's not till 7:30.
Interesting.
But yeah, I try to get my workout out early to start my day.
Great stuff. We're coming to the end very shortly. So thank you for tuning in, guys. Please hit the like and subscribe button. And if you would like to work with me or Jimmy, reach out to us at Battle Conquer or direct message me on Instagram or drop me an email. Let us know what you think of the podcast. It's always appreciated. Go for it, Jimmy.
Yes, and you can reach me again at my website at actmissions.roostersite.com. is where you'll find Band of Brothers website, and it'll tell you all about what we're doing here in Pattaya. Our mission statement is there. There are testimonies there. There are photos there from last year's mission and working with different men. It's all there on the website. Yeah.
Wonderful. Once again, thank you for tuning in. If you want to sponsor the podcast or you want to be a guest on the podcast, you might have a business in Pattaya, reach out to me and we will make it happen. Much love. See you soon.